Hello, children. This is Grandma Carla, and we are reading Freddy and the Perilous Adventure by Walter R. Brooks, and we are on Chapter 2. When the animals on the bean farm learned that Freddy and the two ducks were going to take a balloon trip on the 4th, they were very much excited. A number of them came and asked Freddy if they couldn't go too. Freddy thought most of them were rather relieved when he said it couldn't be arranged. But they all planned to go over and see the ascension. And Mrs. Wogus, one of the cows, was appointed chairman of the refreshment committee to see that a nice lunch was put up and taken along. Of course, the Centerboro Fairgrounds was too long a walk for some of the smaller animals, so Hank, the old white horse, said he'd get hitched up to the phaeton that they'd already taken with them on the trip to Florida, and the mice and the chickens and any other small animals could get a ride. Freddy spent nearly all day on the 3rd looking through his encyclopedia and trying to find how far the balloon might be expected to travel before it came down again. He didn't look at the encyclopedia very often, and like everything else in his study, which was in front part of the pig pen, it was pretty dusty. When he turned the leaves, the dust went up his nose and made him sneeze, and then he would lose his place and have to turn back and try to find it again, and that would make him sneeze again. And then when he found his place, his eyes would be watering so that he couldn't read what it said. So he didn't get very much information. But he kept at it, and by 4 in the afternoon, he did know a little bit more than when he started. He knew that nobody could tell where the balloon was going to come down. So he put the encyclopedia away, and he blew his nose and went over to see Charles the rooster. Charles was sitting on a fence post in front of the hen house. "Hello, Freddy," he said rather distantly. "Hello, Charles," said the pig. "I suppose you've heard about this balloon ascension tomorrow." "Who hasn't?" said the rooster. "Anybody'd think nobody'd ever gone up in a balloon before to hear them talk." "Oh, sure," said Freddy. "It doesn't amount to anything. Only thing I'm worried about is this speech I've got to make. I'm no good as a speaker. Now, if they only had you to make one of your good, rousing, patriotic orations, that would be something." "Oh, you'll make a good speech, all right," said Charles. "Of course, you haven't had the practice I've had, and maybe you aren't as eloquent as I am, but you'll do all right." Now, what Charles said was perfectly true. When Freddy made a speech, he said what he had to say and sat down. But when Charles made one, he said everything he had to say 6 different ways, each more high-sounding and with bigger words than the last one. On days when Charles was to give an oration, animals came from miles around to shout and applaud and wonder how he could go on and on in such beautiful language without saying anything of importance at all. For a funny thing about Charles's speeches was that though they were so stirring at the time, when you got home and thought them over, you couldn't remember what they were about. "Well, I don't know," said Freddy. "I'd hate to disappoint Mr. Gulcher, and yet I'm afraid I'll make a poor job of it. I'd like the balloon ride, all right. It'll be wonderful. But the important thing is to have the occasion a success. And with me as the principal speaker, well, I tell you, Charles, much as I hate to pass up this wonderful experience, I've decided that you are the one who really ought to make the speech and go up. I've made up my mind for once to be unselfish about something and to step aside and let you have the honor." Very generous," said Charles, without much conviction. "But it doesn't seem to me that it would be fair. You were the one that thought up this thing and arranged it, of course." He said, "I could make the speech and then you and the ducks—" "Well, that wouldn't do," said Freddy. "Whoever speaks has to go up. And another thing, you're a more suitable person because it was a rooster along with a duck and a sheep that was the first living creature ever to fly. So the honor should be a rooster's, not a pig's. No pig ever flew." But Charles said, "No, I wouldn't feel right about it, Freddy." He said he looked very noble and self-sacrificing for a moment, and then he winked at Freddy and edged closer along the rail fence, and he said in a low voice, "No, Freddy, my boy, I guess you're stuck with it." "I guess I am," said Freddy to himself as he walked back home. "Oh, why am I such a fearless character?" 2 other volunteers for the ascension presented themselves, however. Unfortunately, as they had voices that could only be heard for about 2 inches, neither of them could take Freddy's place. They were Mr. and Mrs. Webb, the spiders. Quick, one of the mice who lived in the farmhouse came down to the pig pen just before supper to tell Freddy that the Webbs wanted to see him. Since it was an hour's hard walk for Mr. Webb from the house to the pig pen, he usually asked one of the mice to go for Freddy when he wanted to talk to him. The pig found the Webbs in a crack between 2 boards on the back porch where they usually waited when they had an engagement with one of the farm animals. He put his snout down and they climbed up on it, and then, trying not to tickle, walked up close to his ear. "How about taking us up on the balloon trip, Freddy?" said Mr. Webb. "Couldn't you smuggle us aboard?" "I don't see why not," said the pig. "But are you sure you'd like it? We may be carried hundreds of miles before we get to Earth again." "We went to Florida, didn't we?" said the spider. "And we'd like to get away. We both need a change. Mother, particularly. She's been trying to shake that cough ever since early spring. You know how it is. You can't catch flies if you begin to cough every time you try to creep up on one." So Freddy said all right. He'd pick them up if they would ride over to the fairgrounds in the phaeton with the other animals. Usually, on summer mornings, Freddy woke up as quickly as possible and dashed off to the duck pond to take his morning dip with the others. But on the morning of the 4th, he tried to wake up as slowly as possible. First, he just listened. That rushing sound, could it be rain? He tried to pretend it was rain and to go back to sleep, but he knew the sound too well. It was wind in the treetops. Wind. And he was going up in a balloon. But maybe it was cloudy. He opened one eye and looked at the window. But the eye didn't tell him anything because the window was so dirty that from the inside it always looked as if a storm was coming up. He opened his other eye, sighed, and slowly crawled out of bed. And then he saw a streak of sunlight under the door. Now, of course, Freddy could have run away, or he could have pretended that he was sick or something like that. But he was not that kind of pig. If something unpleasant had to be done, he did it. He just wanted to be sure first that it really had to be done. So now he went over to the looking glass and tried different expressions on his face to see which one would be the most suitable for the occasion. Of course, pigs don't wear regular clothes, so all Freddy had to put on was an expression when he got up in the morning. And on important mornings, it often took him longer to dress than it would you or me. For he had a good many different expressions. When he went down to the First Animal Bank, of which he was the president, he wore the serious pig with grave responsibilities on his shoulder expression. When he was doing detective work, he wore the keen-eyed pig who misses nothing expression. And when he was writing poetry, the one that he put on was his dreamy, poetic pig expression. This morning he hesitated between the intrepid pig who scoffs at peril and the pig who is about to go up in a balloon and thinks nothing of it. They were a good deal alike, so he combined the two and wore them both. The resulting expression was one of such iron determination that it greatly impressed all of the animals with whom he talked that morning. "Why, you aren't scared at all, Freddy," said Mrs. Wiggins the cow. "Land's sakes, you wouldn't get me to go up in one of those contraptions?" "Pooh, you wouldn't be any more scared than I am," said Freddy, truthfully. He hung around the barnyard most of the morning, enjoying the admiration and the congratulations of his friends. For he felt, very sensibly, I think, that he might as well get all the glory he could out of the ascension beforehand in case he drifted out to sea and was never heard of again. And when, after dinner, the animals set out for the fairgrounds, he and the 2 ducks rode in the place of honor in the back seat of the phaeton. The bean animals were very popular in Cinderborough, and Freddy bowed and waved to many old friends as he went along through the fairgrounds to where the balloon, now almost fully inflated with gas, was tugging in the breeze at the ropes that held it to the ground. The sideshows and the merry-go-round were almost deserted, for everyone had crowded up to listen to Freddy's speech and see the ascension. Mr. Gulcher greeted them warmly. "How's this for a crowd?" he said. "We're going to have an ascension today that is an ascension. And these are the two ducks. Happy to meet you, I'm sure. And all these are your friends. Gulcher welcomes you, one and all." On the ride over from the farm, the two spiders had climbed up on top of Freddy's head, where they had prudently anchored themselves to a few strands of web spun between his ears. But when Mr. Gulcher had led Freddy and the ducks over and helped them into the basket, which was swung from cords that formed a net over the bulging surface of the balloon above them, the spiders found a safer place in a crevice of the basket where they would be out of the way and still see all that was going on. "Now," said Mr. Gulcher, "you want to know what all of these things are for. This here cord is attached to a valve that lets the gas out of the balloon. If you want to come down, you let a little gas out. If you're coming down too fast, you throw out some of the bags of sand fastened along the side of the basket. If you're drifting along close to the ground and want to stop, you throw out this grapnel." And he picked up a thing that looked a sort of four-pronged anchor, which was fastened to the end of the coil of rope. "But we won't need to know about these things," said Freddy. "I mean, you'll know better than we would what to do." "I would if I was with you," said Mr. Gulcher. "You don't mean you're going to send us up alone," said the pig. "Why, sure. 'Twouldn't draw a crowd if I just took a pig up with me. Pig goes up alone. There, now you've got something." He took a handbill out of his pocket. "That's the way we advertise it. See? See the flying pig. Daring animal astronaut braves dangers of the stratosphere. Hear the talking pig. Accomplished porker delivers patriotic address. Witness this breathtaking, super stupendous phenomenon. The first and only quadrupedal orator and balloonist will make a balloon ascension at 4 p.m. sharp," and so on and so on. "That's very nice," said Freddy. "Only I've never, ever driven a balloon." "I'm sure you'll drive it very capably, Freddy," said Alice calmly. She and her sister were sitting at the edge of the basket watching the crowd. "Oh dear," said Emma. "Are you sure it's quite safe, Mr. Gulcher?" "Be still, sister," said Alice severely. "Of course it isn't safe, but it won't be any safer if you tremble all over. What would Uncle Wesley say if he could hear your bill chattering?" "I'll try to stop it," said Emma, "but here's that nice sheriff." The sheriff, who had come over to the fairgrounds with some of the prisoners, came up and wished Freddy a pleasant journey and handed him a large paper bag. "Some of the candy the boys pulled yesterday," he said. "They thought you might like something to chew on when you're charging around the sky." At a signal from Mr. Gulcher, the band began to play. "Soon the band stops," he shouted to Freddy. "Soon's the band stops, we'll begin to cast off the ropes, and while we're doing it, you'll make your speech. Then we'll let her go." Freddy nodded mournfully. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he opened the bag of candy and wrapped several pieces and put them in his mouth. They were good. He started to chew them. That is, he closed his jaws down on them, but when he tried to open his jaws again, he couldn't. His upper and lower teeth were stuck as tight together as if they'd been glued. And just when the band stopped playing, the crowd gave a cheer and looked expectantly at Freddy, while the men began casting off the ropes that held the balloon to the ground. "Your speech," whispered Mr. Gulcher. "Make it. You've only got 3 minutes." Said Freddy, rolling his eyes, and the muscles on the sides of his jaw stood out as he tried to pull them apart. "Speech, speech," shouted the crowd. And Alice said, "Freddy, what on earth?" Said Freddy, pointing to his mouth. "I don't know what's the matter," said Mr. Gulcher angrily. But by Gormley, it's the last time I'll ever make a business deal with an animal. He turned to the sheriff. Look at him. Your friend that's so brave, and he's so scared he can't talk. Freddy shook his head violently. He said. Some of the rougher elements of the crowd, who did not know Freddy very well, began to shout, boo, boo, while others, who had heard a good deal about his past exploits, shook their heads mournfully. Well, if you don't make a speech, I will, exclaimed Alice. She flapped her wings. Ladies and gentlemen, but the crowd was making so much noise now, some attacking, some defending the pig's failure to speak, that no one heard her. Let her go then, shouted Mr. Gulcher, and with a rush, the balloon shot up in the air. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Here's a picture of Freddy trying to get the rooster to make the speech and go up in the balloon. But the rooster knew what he was trying to pull and said, I guess you're stuck. And then here's a picture of Mr. Gulcher trying to tell them how to drive the balloon. And he says, this here cord is attached to a valve. I hope Freddy heard what he was saying. Freddy didn't know he was going up by himself, did he? And next time we will read chapter 3. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.